If you ask the question, who is the strongest character in the game? Well, by physical strength standards, no one can hold a candle to Guilty. But is she any good in gameplay? Luckily, thanks to Guilty being in the Liberation program, everyone will get a copy, provided you do some extra daily tasks for like a month or two. In a scene where the Type 2 slot is super competitive, Guilty just says, screw all that, we're going full damage. Since I will not be pulling for aid, I wanted to explore another unit that was related to the shotgun meta that the game is trying to bring in. And what better choice than a solid, free-to-play unit that everyone can obtain? My name is Psyche, and I'm gonna explain why Guilty is worth building and adding to your arsenal. Let's begin. Even though Guilty is considered the most meta out of the 3 initial rehab units, she doesn't exactly see much use in late-game content. This is because instead of an offense-oriented setup, most bosses demand a combination of attack, defense, and healing buffs in order to stay in the level for long. Using Guilty will mean missing out on some of the most influential teammates like the Bunnies, Novel, Marciana, and so on. So despite all that, why would I build Guilty, might you ask? Well, I think we can start answering some of that once we get into her kit and playstyle. As usual, I will be using my criteria for skill leveling priorities to ensure that you don't need to overspend your skill modules if you can help it. Guilty is a shotgun user, standard 9 shots in 1 magazine, win code. Skill 1 is probably one of the most interesting abilities in the game. The Guilty will duplicate a percentage of attack from the unit with the highest attack in the team. This means if you have a built-up Type 3 DPS, that investment can even bleed into Guilty. This buff will happen every 6 normal shots and can stack up to 5 times. Assuming this is level 10, each stack will duplicate 8.81% of damage, meaning if it's fully stacked, it can equate to just over 40% attack boost. This is not a small number. It's also important to know that since she will duplicate base attack and not final attack, she will take the value that's displayed on a unit's stat page. In case if you're wondering, if Guilty is the unit with the highest attack in the team, then yes, she can duplicate her own attack stat. Assuming you fire the gun constantly, the 5 stacks are easily sustainable without any outside help, as they last a whopping 10 seconds, and you can fire 6 shots within that no problem. The only thing is that since skill 1 only triggers every 6 shots, you're gonna have to go without the full 5 stacks for your first burst rotation. This skill gets high priority. Assuming you have at least one other DPS built up, you can expect to get some huge mileage from investing into this skill. And assuming you have Tove as a shotgun support, you can also expect to fully stack this even faster, as Tove will buff your attack speed. Skill 2 will increase the count of buff stacks by 1 for win code allies, regardless of skill level, also giving a small attack up. This skill gets a low priority, as the use case for it is just not quite there yet. If it was just buffing stacks by 1 unconditionally, then it could be quite useful. But for the time being, the only notable ally this affects is Pepper. You might also be thinking of Scarlet Altar, except her skill cannot stack, since it literally says so in the description. The attack up is also quite minuscule at a maximum of just over 4%. What it is useful is helping herself stacking skill 1 faster, as she also qualifies as a win code ally. Since that buff stack increase is 1, regardless whether the skill is level 1 or 10, you can just focus on something else instead. Finally, the burst. A healthy amount of single target damage, then another instance, as well as a defense down when skill 1 is fully stacked. This affects the enemy with the highest attack. But if you see my Maid Parvati video, shotgun comps are generally used for boss stages anyways, so you can control who this burst skill damages. The burst gets medium priority. While some other units' burst skills are worth maxing out, Guilty's burst is still a respectable investment that can pay off later. For now, this section is not going to be as important as some of the more meta units. Guilty gets second priority in this race for overload gear. Don't try to break your supply of modules unless you really like Guilty as a character. There are just better units to prioritize. That being said, since she is still a DPS shotgun user, she definitely still benefits from overload gear. Starting from the top of the tier list, nothing is going to be required to run Guilty. And in the improvement tier, we have the usual suspects of attack and max ammo capacity. Shotguns just love their attack ups and ammo. Since Guilty reloads all shots at once instead of incrementally, like loading shells into the chamber, you don't have to worry about any last bullet fired effects, so feel free to stack ammo count. In situational, as always, if you care about min-maxing, elemental damage gets placed in this tier. No need to explain anything here. It's only relevant against 1/6 of enemies in the game, but it can matter when you need it the most, since it's likely you'll be fighting a boss that's weak to wind anyways. On the better than nothing tier, we have crit rate, crit damage, and hit rate. Crit doesn't calculate well into the damage formula, and hit rate, while pretty good, doesn't really impact your DPS that much. Plus, there are external ways you can buff it. By elimination, charge speed, charge damage, and defense are useless. Good luck charging up your shotgun, though it would be a pretty cool idea for a new unit. For the cube, again, you can treat Guilty as having second priority. She can receive the hand-me-downs from your meta units. You can settle for Resilience or Wingman, whichever one you can afford to place on Guilty. You could go Bastion as well, but that cube is super competitive, so unless you just happen to have a slot available, you can just forego it. There's also the Assault cube, which gives a bit of hit rate and serves as a stat stick. Because of the immense amount of competition, a question to ask when slotting in Guilty is, why bother putting her in when there's just other type 2s that do more? Well, the good thing about certain bosses in the game is that some of them don't actually require any healers/defenders to stay in the level. Guilty is amazing in the Gravedigger fight, provided you're skilled enough to hit the cancel rings, because except for that and the occasional flying drills, Gravedigger has no other attacks. You just have to worry about completing the rings and forgo any kind of defense or healing, and just focus on attack. There's also the Union Raid boss Doctor from last season, where it's actually acceptable to not have a healer. Sure, you will still get damage here and there, but you can survive it without any defensive units. What I'm trying to say here is, there are times when you don't need to slot in Marciana, Bonnies, or the Schoolgirls, and can get away with a more offense-oriented team. If we consider the possibility that cases such as Gravedigger and Doctor will likely start popping up more and more in the future, then a unit like Guilty will start to have more use cases. As for teams, you can go with a full shotgun comp with Toph, Guilty, Maid Parvati, another shotgun, and then a flex. Can be a healer, a type 2 CDR unit, or another shotgun. This is in my opinion as shotgun as you can get, while also having the flexibility for a 5th teammate to do whatever you want. You can realistically use any shotgun DPS to pair with, such as Sugar, Drake, or even Isabel. As it currently stands, Guilty's skill 2 can also impact Epinel and Pepper, so you can run Pepper as a type 1 healer, and well, I don't think a lot of people play Epinel, unfortunately. Since Guilty doesn't take up a type 3 DPS slot, as long as you have a built-up character to duplicate attack with, you can get some pretty good mileage. For example, in my Gravedigger team for the last event's challenge mode, I usually just run Modernia as the 5th slot, as miniguns fire quite consistently, and my Modernia is quite beefy in terms of the attack stat. You just have to consider that shotgun teams are typically not so good in campaign stages and only work with certain bosses. You might also be wondering, what about Leona? Well, she can work as a shotgun support too, primarily focusing on hit rate and pellet count. The only shotgun user that can really benefit from Leona right now is Maid Parvati. Even in non-shotgun teams, you might still also have a reason to run Guilty instead of someone like Novel, who also debuffs bosses, as there's quite a big shortage of win code DPSs, and Guilty's burst gain is certainly better than most type 2s. So once again, Guilty's teams can be quite flexible in terms of having a shotgun niche. As long as you have some understanding of where and how shotgun teams work, you should be fine. For now, it's a little too early for me to say that Guilty will definitely be useful down the road. But for myself, she's one of those units that you can see your investments paying off as more characters and bosses are introduced into the game. Since there's still no new rounds of rehab units, you can take your sweet time liberating Guilty. And when you do, my personal advice is to just give her some levels in skills and gear once in a while. If Shift Up actually manages to make shotgun teams meta, then Guilty is gonna fit in nicely. The way I see it, she is a future-proof DPS that is accessible to everyone. And for that reason, I'm giving Guilty a 3 out of 5 rating for now, but I can easily see that moving to a 4 out of 5 in the future as bosses or teams get more varied. I hope you enjoyed this somewhat brief analysis on a free-to-obtain unit. I think this video is a nice continuation after we got introduced to Maid Parvati, now that we're seeing more themes with shotgun teams. Let me know if there are any standard pool characters you would like me to cover next. Assuming there's no new character/collab announcement, I can definitely do a couple of these between patches. Anyways, thank you for watching, and as always, have fun with the game.